Hello, I'm Petel. Before I'll start, I just want to say sorry if my English isn't the best. It's not my native language, but since this is about Doctor Who, I wish to share my ideas with international Who fans/critics. Also, while I have complaints about the show, current directions, obviously those are my opinions, and it's totally understandable if you disagree with them. I used to love Doctor Who, but ever since Chibnall took over the show, like a lot of fans, my love for the show started to diminish. The more the show kept going, the more flaws I saw. Technical issues like weird editing, but also narrative and writing issues. But I kept watching the show because I wanted to like it. I wanted to enjoy the show I used to love, and moreover, I didn't want the show to just die out. Many fans who saw similar flaws started giving up on the show, and it seems like Doctor Who is just destined to just drivel to obscurity. But then I started thinking, what would I have done if I could fix it? Let's say I have my own TARDIS, and I travel back in time and have a talk with Chibnall about changes to his ideas about the future of the show. What would I have done? So let's try. Let's go back in time and rewrite the Chibnall era of Doctor Who. I will be focusing on fixing the main story arc that was introduced mainly in Fugitive of the Judoon. I'm not here to fix a specific episode storyline. That means I'll be looking at the Timeless Child, the Division, and the Flux storylines. So, where do we begin? I think we start with, as I said, Fugitive of the Judoon. There might be several dialogue changes in Spyfall, as some of the Master's plan and revelations will be different, but as we're looking at the big picture, we won't focus on those. Fugitive of the Judoon will be mainly the same, up to the point the Doctor discovered TARDIS and Ruth regained her memories. In our version, the Doctor doesn't discover the TARDIS, but rather she discovers a TARDIS. Either it won't be camouflaged, or it would be, but obviously not as a blue phone box. Even in Chibnall's version, that makes less than 0 sense. As the Doctor enters the TARDIS, she's super surprised and confused. Why is there a TARDIS hidden in Earth? And what does Ruth have to do with this? She sees a large notebook on the control panel and opens it to read what's inside. But just then, Ruth enters the TARDIS, and with a smug face she says, "Surprise? It's actually bigger on the inside." Surprised, the Doctor accidentally rips a page from the notebook and puts it in her pocket absentmindedly. She looks at Ruth and says, "This is a TARDIS. Why do you have a TARDIS?" Ruth also seems surprised. "You know what a TARDIS is? Who are you?" "Are you a Time Lord too?" asks the Doctor. "What's going on here?" "You can't be," says Ruth, who seemed to realize something. The Doctor hesitates, but then she decides to reveal herself. "I'm the Doctor." To this revelation, Ruth seems surprised, but then she smiles and gets closer to the Doctor. "How I've missed you," she says. "Don't you recognize me? Ruth and Smith, remember?" The Doctor has no idea what she's talking about. "Those were always our code names when we went to missions together." "Missions?" But before Ruth manages to explain, they're trapped by Judoon. When the Judoon scan them, they start with Ruth. She's identified as the agent and their target. The Doctor is scanned as the Doctor and as an accomplice. Ruth mumbles that judging by the current date, they probably after them due to a mission they both did many incarnations ago, though it was in this time frame. Time travel, remember? As the Doctor asks her, "Missions by whom?" Ruth answers, "Division." The rest of the episode will continue pretty much the same, with the exception that Ruth is not the Doctor. Well, the mystery of what is Division and why the Doctor has no memory of it is not as strong as how come there is a version of the Doctor she isn't aware of. The answer to the latter is both super retconny and also kind of weak, while the answer for the former is, hopefully, none of those things. The rest of the series will be the same, with some scenes added where the Doctor notices the page she has in her pocket and starts reading it in order to understand that mystery. Now we're getting to Ascension of the Cybermen and the Timeless Children. Those will be the same until the master story about the Timeless Child. The story is mostly the same, without the super obvious and super dumb plot twist that it was the Doctor. In fact, the Doctor won't even ask what happened to her, because the Master will tell her that both the Timeless Child and Tecteun disappeared shortly after the Society of the Time Lord became established, and around the time that the information about them was hidden. I guess that there would need to be an explanation about how the Master found this information, but that doesn't really matter here. The Master's plan is pretty much the same, excluding the part the Doctor has in it. After all, it was in his character to want to expand his own lifespans and adding more regenerations, so unlimited amount of those is just up his alley. I guess it didn't really need the Doctor, but she did come here mostly of her own volition, and he just loved to brag in front of her, so he told her the story. Also, I'm not sure if it was like that in the original version, but in my version, the story of the Timeless Child is super secret, and not even the highest people in the Time Lord Society knew about it, with very, very small exceptions. The rest of the episode continues as normal, until the Doctor gets stuck in the Matrix. It's not super critical, but I figures that since she isn't the Timeless Child, she won't be able to escape by overloading it with data. But I thought that maybe she'll try using some code word she heard from Ruth, as she suspects that the vision has something to do with the Timeless Child. And to her surprise, it actually worked, and the Matrix recognized her as part of the vision. Brandon's story is completely removed because it doesn't work with the Doctor not being the Timeless Child. The episode will end the same, as the Doctor gets captured by the Judoon for being an accomplice to the agent. Side note, that technically could be removed. There isn't a real reason why the Doctor should be captured. In fact, maybe you can forget about making her an accomplice, and the Judoon literally don't care about her. But those are trivial details we can ignore, I guess. And that leads us to Flux. Oh, Flux. This is where our job really begins. For the Flux, I think we're going to do things a little bit different. Watching the latest season, I felt that the effect of the Flux on time was very ill-defined. They kept saying that time wasn't as it should be, but it felt like there weren't enough examples for that, nor a satisfying explanation to what it means. So let's start with explaining that, and from that point we can go forward. Tecteun's plan was to use the Flux to destroy the universe space, and also to influence Swarm and Azure to use it to release time in order to destroy it as well. The effect of released time will be that many random locations in space will become a link between two times. Example for that will be Williamson Tunnels, or the middle of the village in episode 4. Additionally, some random time glitches are appearing from time to time, like the time as they suddenly became night in episode 3, though there are going to hopefully be more examples for that. Next, let's talk about Swarm and Azure. In my version, during the first 3 episodes, both the Doctor and the viewers will suspect them of being responsible for the Flux. But at the ending of episode 3, the Doctor will actually defeat them, only to learn that they were puppets in other people's skins. Meaning that I'm going to greatly reduce the role in the story. The reason for that is that I felt like there were so many moving pieces in the story, and their goals, their abilities, and their past with the Doctor felt to me too ambiguous as a result. So in my version, while he did have plans of escaping and what to do after that, Swarm only managed to escape because the Flux caused his imprisonment chamber to malfunction. He then escapes and releases Azure, but his goal only leads to the 3rd chapter, where the Doctor actually defeats them, as I said before. But we'll get there later, and I guess now would be a good time to start working on each chapter in the season in order. Now, I'm not going to fix every little plot point, every cringy line of dialogue, or every editing mistake. I'm going to overview the main plot of each episode and talk about the changes I'm going to have in order to fix the main story arc. Let's start with Chapter 1, The Halloween Apocalypse. This episode will be mostly the same with very few exceptions. First, how Swarm escape, as I mentioned earlier. I'm also going to remove the vision that he gives the Doctor, as he isn't going to be a major villain in the series, and it doesn't really add to the story anyway. I'm going to add some dialogue to the conversation between the Doctor and Corvinista while Yaz releases Dan. The Doctor will tell Carvanista that the only way she managed to find him was that his name was mentioned in a page she got from the agent's notebook, just to have a little explanation as to how she actually managed to find any member of the Vision. Another major changes I'm having is removing the character of Claire completely and give all of her roles to Dai. Since Woman Azure didn't really have any reason to kidnap Dai, and since their role in the story is much smaller, I'm going to combine the two characters. Obviously, she won't meet the Doctor and Yaz next to the TARDIS, and in fact, the Doctor won't meet Dai before the Angels episode. Earlier, we'll show during Dai and Dan's conversations that Dai have been having weird dreams lately, and it seems like she always had a good intuition, hinting to her psychic abilities. And while she waits for Dan, it isn't Azure who kidnapped her, but an angel. And that's about it for the first episode. As this episode barely touched the Flux itself, I don't really think it needed that many changes. Now, to the next episode. First, I'm going to split the Doctor, Yaz, and Dan right from the get-go. The reasoning for them splitting up in the show felt to me more like an excuse for we need to bring them to the places that the plot needs them to be. So, in my version, Dan returns to the present. The Doctor finds herself in the past, and Yaz is the only one who remains in the TARDIS. And then the TARDIS gets hijacked by Swarm. Most of the plot regarding the Sontarans is the same. The Doctor is really worried about Yaz, Dan, and the TARDIS. Also, since Dan didn't have a chance to see the Sontarans, his action in the present seems, to me at least, more courageous. Also, while he talks to the Doctor in the Sontarans ship, obviously they have more to talk about, and the Doctor is disheartened to learn that Dan doesn't know where both Yaz and the TARDIS are. One thing that bothers me was the difference between the past and the future. How did the Sontarans manage to change the history of the past to erase Russia? And why didn't it change the present? I thought of two ways to fix it. One would be that they used some sort of special technology to change the memories of the people in the past, and something similar to psychic paper ability to make the map seem different. Another option I thought about was one of those glitches I mentioned earlier. I guess that was what the original intent was in the show, but I didn't feel like it was explained very well. And only after finishing watching half the series a second time and actually thinking about it, I feel like I'm starting to understand. So in order to make it clear, the Doctor is going to ask about it. Instead of just saying, time isn't as it should be, she'll say something like, it's like there's a glitch in time. Events in the future change the past, and events in the past won't affect the future, after she talks with Dan, who is in the future. Or if it's too much exposition, she could at least ask the Sontarans how come the two time frame won't sync, only for them to smirk and say nothing. This way we both see how time isn't as it should be, and see that the Doctor wants to know the reason for that. In the original version, it felt to me like it wasn't explored enough. One thing about the conflicts between the Doctor and the Sontarans in this episode that really pissed me off was the fact that her entire plan of sabotage could only work if the entire Sontaran army went to their 7-minute break simultaneously, which is the very stupid thing for an army to do. They're supposed to be the best military in the universe, though we barely see any evidence for that. So how come they don't know anything about the concept of shifts? So, even though I'm not sure how this should be fixed, it is definitely something that should be fixed. At some point, the Doctor will use the Sontaran time travel to go to where Dan is. And after they finishes the business with Carvanista in the present, the TARDIS shows up. And then they have the "it's a trap" conversation. They enter the TARDIS and it gets hijacked to Atropos, and everything continues to the ending the same way. About what happened to Yaz and Vinder on Atropos, and what Swarm and Azure do there. First of all, Swarm and Azure came there before Yaz, since they took the TARDIS to bring her there. Additionally, one big change is that there are no passengers in this version. Originally, I felt like the concept of unlimited matter they used in the final episode to defeat the Flux doesn't make sense, and then I remember that there is something similar to this already in the universe, a TARDIS. It's bigger on the inside, almost never ending, so I thought that instead of passengers, Swarm and Azure brought a stolen TARDIS to Atropos. It's going to be a unique kind of TARDIS, maybe even one that is barred from this dimension for good reason. It can only be controlled from the outside, as it was designed as a prison. and the inside is infinitely larger than that of a normal TARDIS. Also, since it's supposed to be a prison, it also contained infinitely growing source of food for the prisoners. Let's call it P-TARDIS. The truth is, this change is not as important as the other changes, and keeping it passengers won't change anything. But the fact that we already had an object with infinite content and the show still decides to add another one bothered me enough to include it in here. But if you disagree, I guess you can just imagine passenger whenever I mention this P-TARDIS thing. Not a lot of changes to this episode, but for the few changes I do have, let's look at each person's story in the time storm and see what changes each one has. Let's start with Dan. His story remains similar. Dan constantly jumps between different times and he has some conversation with Dai. During those conversations we can add another hint to her premonition ability. Maybe she'll say something like, I had a dream where you went to a walk with your dog and you never returned. Obviously, he won't see passengers since it isn't in thing. Other than that, nothing in particular changes. Next, Vinder.
Vinder doesn't have changes regarding the main story.
Though some small things bothered me and I wanted to change them. I'll start with the second one since it's smaller. I don't understand why he's allowed to send only one message. It's not like he's in jail, he's just in a very boring post. If there's any security reason, it would make sense to limit it to one message per some time, like once a week or a month. Then again, it's not like this post is a very security-heavy post. The other thing that bothered me was about the stop the recording bit with the Grand Serpent. Let's say I'm Vinder's superior, and I listen to the recording of the meeting. I hear the Grand Serpent say, on one condition, Vinder, turn off the recording. Even if Vinder wouldn't tell me that there was some illegal conspiracy there, stopping the recording would be suspicious. And if the Grand Serpent is so corrupt that no one can do anything, then the whole stop the recording is meaningless. So I thought that maybe he would only signal to Vinder to turn off the recording and not actually say it. And also do that before saying there's a condition. Next, Yaz. I actually don't have anything to change there, since it's mostly to hint about the angels. And lastly, the Doctor. Obviously, there are going to be changes. Number one, Ruth isn't going to show up on the reflection, since, she isn't the Doctor. Side note, while writing the script, I realized I actually could have kept Ruth as another version of the Doctor, and even kept the shape of her TARDIS as a police box. More about that later. But I decided not to do that, since that would mean we don't have any timeless child. Though that could actually be a good thing. Oops, I guess I just spoiled the ending? Anyway, back to the Doctor's past. In this scene, the Doctor and her team are busting Swarm's operations on Atropos. And things are going to be the same. The 4 team members are one unknown, Vinder, Carvanista, Dan, and Ruth, Yaz. I decided not showing Ruth's true form to make it clear who she really is in the scene, since it would make sense that it was a different regeneration and so she wouldn't recognize her form. Instead, they're going to use codenames. Carvanista and the other one's codename are reported, but the Doctor codename will be Smith and the agent codename will be Ruth. And that would be what leads the Doctor to understand who she is. The conflict between the Doctor and Swarm and Azure remains the same except the changes from passenger to P-TARDIS. Maybe Swarm and Azura had a barrier that prevents from more TARDISes to enter the room, not knowing that one of theirs was swapped with one with Maury. The Doctor doesn't visit Tectayun while in the time storm. And that's it about the time storm. After the Doctor manages to convince the Maury, the episode will continue the same way, with small exceptions, like Dai not being kidnapped by Swarm. One small change about Swarm's plan, since I don't understand it in the original show. He wanted time to escape, but he still brought the Doctor there to repair the Maury, since even though she repaired them, time still manages to escape, maybe just partially, so why did he bring the Doctor? If she wouldn't have come, there was no one to repair the Maury and time would have escaped. Maybe there was some sort of failsafe to keep the Maury from being destroyed completely, and only once it has been fixed, even temporarily, they could be destroyed. Maybe that's why you could only see them when they get closer. So in my version, he will explain that he actually needed them to repair in order to completely destroy before he kills the Mori. After Storm revealed to the Doctor that his plan was to release Time and he didn't care about her fixing the Mori since the damage has already been done, the Doctor realizes the danger and sends everyone to stay in the TARDIS. She's about to go to the TARDIS as well, when Swarm tells us to stop, asking her if she ever wondered how time looks like. Moments after this, she stops, Time appears, similar to the sequence from the final episode. The rest of the exchange between the Time and the Ravages remains similar to that sequence, though Time is far more cryptic, and the reason for erasing them isn't clear. At the beginning, they seem surprised as they hoped he'll be their savior, but after a moment they accept it as the ultimate force of destruction. Azur says Ascension like in the show. The Doctor asks Time if now it's her turn, but unlike in the final episode, Time doesn't answer, and just disappears. The Doctor hesitates for a moment and then returns to the TARDIS. Then the episode ends the same way. She leaves Vinder on his own planet, and then talks about finding a way to fix or maybe reset time, only to suddenly see the Angel in the TARDIS, and to have the same cliffhanger. The biggest change to the episode will be, as mentioned before, me replacing Claire with Di. The Doctor will recognize her at Jericho's house since she saw her in Dan's memories the previous episode, while Di would recognize the Doctor due to her premonitions. One thing I would like to change, but isn't as crucial to the main plot, is removing the rule of that which holds the image of an angel becomes itself an angel. I never liked this rule, and ever since it was established in Season 5 it was never mentioned, and sometimes were even contradicted, so it seems like the show retconned it. Though this episode put a caveat on it, saying that doing so takes a lot of effort from the angels, thus explaining why, for example, no picture of the Stars of Liberty becomes an angel. Still, I would have preferred it if this rule wasn't used nor mentioned in this episode. Another rule I would get rid of is the nobody survived it twice. I'm pretty sure that it's another rule that was never brought in the past and was also contradicted. As a side note, I think I should talk a bit more about the term quantum expansion. When I first watched the episode, I didn't understand what exactly happened in this town, why it was dislocated from space and time, or why was there a border between two time periods. And only after a second viewing, I seemed to start to understand it. I think the concept should be addressed. I'm not sure the term quantum extraction was explained very well. Just a few more lines to clarify it would be useful. About the wall between past and future, it could be attributed to the time glitches, which was why the angels chose this town as their base of operations. About that, I think it'll be better if the angels or the Doctor herself say something about the town returning to its place after they get what they want, because I found it hard to understand how Yaz, Dan and Jericho managed to leave the town later on. From there, most of the episode will be the same, until right about when Di exits the cavern. Since she and Dan know each other, I think I should add a scene of them seeing each other on the other side of the time glitch. Dan would try to say to her that he'll save her, when she suddenly falls under her angel's control. Lastly, I'm going to change the way the angels transport the Doctor to the Vision. Turning her into an angel seems like a big deal by the end of the episode, only for it to be reverted the first thing in the next episode. So in my version, after the angels explained to the Doctor their plans, they managed to make it completely dark. Maybe the quantum extraction thingy will turn off the moon on her side or something. The Doctor will turn on her lights, only to see several angels surround her, all with their arm reaching forward to grab her. She asks what they are doing, and the Di angel tells her that if several angels touch someone at the same time, they have enough energy to not just send them back in time, but actually send them out of time. Perhaps even that is a form of quantum extraction. The Doctor lights get turned off, and all the angels grab her at the same time, and she disappears. And that leads us to the next episode, The Survivors of the Flux. I I guess that this episode can be divided to 4 parts. The Doctor's part, Bell and Vinder's part, Yaz and Co part, and Unit part. Let's go one part at a time and focus on what will be changed and what will be the same. Yaz. Not a lot of changes required. Though I wish that Dan and Jericho won't be treated constantly as comic relief for secondary characters, while Yaz is the main character. I guess Jericho is secondary enough, but Dan's supposed to be one of the main companions, yet he's treated as a joke most of the times. Also, I found it weird that the hermit told them, "Fetch your dog," despite the fact that it didn't help them understand what they need to do, while what they really needed was meeting Williamson. However, in my version, I'm actually going to use it as some sort of bait and switch. After they meet Williamson, Dan's going to ask, why did we have to search for Cavernista anyway? But no one could answer him. The answer will show itself later. Unit. Actually, there are barely any changes to this part. I do wish that the Great Serpent ability would be better defined, and also how he got to hers and why he joins the Sontarans. Bell and Vinder. I didn't talk about Belle at all, and that's because I didn't really have anything to change. But since I'm starting to focus on her story now, I guess some backtracking are in order. I will keep most of Belle's adventures the same, but I'll move her seeing Azur capturing people in the pit artist to before episode 4. The reason is simple. In the original show, Swarm and Azur used the captives as energy to reach the Doctor, who is outside the universe. As I understood it, they didn't plan on hijacking Division and changing the Flux final hit point to the planet's time, and only decided to do so after reaching there. But that kind of doesn't make sense. They met the Doctor and Atropos and then left her there only to try and find her again, this time using a much more convoluted way. Also, in my version, they are no longer relevant after episode 3, so what they did was using their captives as energy to reach the planet's time, which was sealed from entry for them by Division. Maybe it was even moved to outside of the universe. And that's how they reached Atropos in episode 2. That's why Bell sees them doing it earlier in the series. However, it's not the same for Vinder. Using information from the message Bell left for him, Vinder reaches the location that Swarm and Azul plan to move to Atropos from before they leave. And just the same as in the show, they capture him inside one of their pit artists. In fact, as they saw how he recognized them despite the fact that they still haven't met him, Swarm and Azur search information about him, and thus decides to pick him as one of the potential repairs for the Mori. And if you ask, how come he meets them after he left Atropos? Well, don't forget, time's cronky. Wibbly wobbly, timey wimey. And so, Vinder gets stuck inside a pit artist, only this time he's alone, since Swarm didn't kidnap Dai. I do have one more change, though to be honest, I'm not so sure about it. Let's say this change is an optional one. During her little encounter with Azur and Conpisano, Bell befriends 2 people, not 1. When Azur tries to capture the masses, Bell rescues one of them, but fails to rescue the other. Let's call this person Cap, since they've been captive. Why did I do it? The answer will come in the final episode. The Doctor. Okay, so here it comes. The big stuff. First of all, as mentioned before, this is the first time the Doctor meets Tecteun, since she didn't meet her in episode 3. The reason for that is that in the show, Tecteun's action didn't make any sense. She brought the Doctor to her in episode 3 while she was in the time storm, and moments before sending her back she says,
"And don't come looking for this."
Except the next thing she does is bring her back using the angels. It didn't make any sense to me, so I decided to change it, and make it so this is the first time the Doctor met her. And another big, or small, depending how you look at it, change I'm having is that my Tecteun won't be a middle-aged white woman, but rather a young, possibly black man. The reason? Simple. When I watched the show, I automatically realized that this woman was Tecteun, since it's the only person she could be. Related to Division, knows the Doctor, physically old enough to be her mother, and yet the Doctor didn't even consider the possibility that this is who this person is. And it felt like the show wants it to be a big reveal, but it was too obvious. By changing her race, age, and gender, I actually put a mystery in the eyes of both the Doctor and the viewers. So from now on, I will refer to Tecteun in a male pronoun. Most of what they talk about is pretty much the same, with the added explanation about Tecteun using the Flux to release Swarm and Azul, and using them to release time to help destroy the universe. Of course, they don't talk about the Doctor being the timeless child, since she isn't. In fact, Tecteun would tell the Doctor about how they recruited her to the Vision, but would not elaborate about why she left and in what circumstances she lost the memories of her time in the Vision. So I guess this is the time I'll show all my card and have my big reveal, though it isn't such a big reveal, just an explanation. Also, Tecteun won't reveal his identity until the very ending of the episode, but more on that later. So let's talk about how the Doctor was recruited to the Vision. The Vision had an ideological disagreement with the rest of the Time Lords. While the Time Lord Society didn't allow interference, the Vision saw it as an important tool that could and should be used. And throughout all their work from the shadows, the Vision noticed two Time Lords who constantly disobeyed the rule of non-interference, the Doctor and the Master. As the latter did so out of ego and greed and cannot be controlled, the Vision didn't want to add him to their troops. However, they were interested in the Doctor, who travels across time and space and interfere out of sense of justice and adventure, and they decided to recruit them. They met the seventh incarnation of the Doctor and convinced him to join the troops. Whether they used deceptions or pure persuasion is unclear. As a Time Lord serving under the Vision, the Doctor received the gift of unlimited regenerations, and who knows how long and how many lives the Doctor had while serving the Vision. However, at some point, the Doctor decided to leave. The reason for that is still unknown. The Doctor was forced back into the original form they had before they joined the Vision, the Seventh Doctor, and stripped of their unlimited regenerations, leaving them with the original amount they had left. The Doctor was then sent in their TARDIS to Earth, America, 1999. Their memory still unstable, the Doctor exits the TARDIS, only to be riddled with bullets and die.
Hey, this is editor Petel. While editing this video, I realized that there was more context to the Doctor coming to Earth at that moment. So I guess they can return him in a different time. I picked this moment because I thought it was kind of neat to tie it up to the movie. And I picked the seventh Doctor because he was the one with the most unaccounted for time, except maybe the 8th or the 9th during the TV show and the movie. So that's why I picked this moment, but I guess it doesn't really matter when they'll return him. Anyway, let's continue.
The rest of the episode continues in a similar manner. Though the anger the Doctor had against Tecteun stealing her life is replaced by anger both at herself for being part of the Vision and on Tecteun for taking her memories. The next big change is the ending. As Swarm and Azor aren't part of the story, they don't suddenly show up. But you know who does? None other than Ruth. Tecteun acts as though it's normal that Ruth is there, saying as she helps orchestrate the Flux. However, to his surprise, Ruth draws a gun and shoots him. He falls to the ground, wounded, and starts to regenerate. Quickly, Ruth pulls out a syringe and injects something into his body, stopping the regeneration. He's still alive, but he's about to die. He looks at Ruth, bewildered, and asks her with his last strength why she does that. As a kid, I adored you and looked at you as a parent, but as I grew older and served under you, I realized you didn't save me, you used me. First, I was your experiment. And when that was over, I became your agent. I did everything for the Vision, for you. But soon I started to understand that there is nothing in the universe, nothing in this universe, that I can connect with. It took away my life. I don't know where I came from, and why I'm like I am. And instead of helping a poor child, you turned me into a weapon. As he speaks, the Doctor starts to understand, and as she looks at the dying man in the floor, she says, "You're Tecteun. And you," she looks at Ruth, "you are the timeless child." Ruth looks at the Doctor, though her gun is still pointed towards Tecteun. "I lied," she says. "There was something in this universe I could connect to. Someone." She then looks back at Tecteun. "But when I met this person, I found out you stole their memories, just like you stole my life. The Doctor was my only true companion, and you erased her. Again, everything I had was stolen by this universe. That's why I convinced you to destroy it completely. This universe is my enemy. But don't forget, dear mother, that no matter how much you try to deny it, you are part of this universe as well. And then she shoots the Cleon again, killing him. The doctor tries to stop her, but then Ruth points a gun at her. I'm sorry, she says, but if you have no memory of me, I have no connection to you as well. Goodbye, Doctor. And then, the episode ends. The final episode would probably have the most changes, as I completely remove the Ravagers and the 3 Doctors. This episode, which is supposed to conclude the series, has a lot of moving parts, and I think that the best way to work on all those parts would be focusing on each section separately, at least until all of the parts converge. Some things will appear here sort of out of order, but I think that would make it easier to understand. So let's start with the Sontarans' plan. They planned to gather as much matter in one place and cover themselves with the Lupari ship's protection in order to be the only survivors of the Flux. I guess I can accept that, but if that's the case, why call only Cybermen and Dalek?
They should have called as many species as they can to increase the amount of matter to shield them.
Also, and far more importantly, I believe there is simply 0% chance that the Dalek would have agreed to their proposal. The idea that Dalek are the supreme life form and that every other life form must be destroyed is so ingrained in the Daleks' DNA and mindset that it's even higher than self-preservation. They would choose death before legitimately agreeing to any kind of alliance. So in my version, instead of sending a message of peace to Dalek and Cybermen, the Sontaran will transmit the information of the final location of the Flux, pretending to be some sort of information leak or mistake, luring all other species to that location. Other than that, the plan can remain the same. Now let's look at all of our moving parts. Let's start with Yaz and Co, since they particularly stay the same until they meet the Doctor. That concludes Yaz and Co. Bell and Carvanista.
They met on Bell's stolen Lupari ship and originally were hostile toward each other until they encounter
the Sontarans at the end of the last episode. At the start of this episode, they defeat the Sontarans who raided their ship. Worried about the other Lupari, Carvanista tries to contact them but get no answer. Carvanista says that they'll need to find out what the Sontarans want. Originally, Belle doesn't want anything to do with it, but after a small persuasion from Tigme, she decided to help. She basically does the same thing as the Doctor did, and Carvanista gets captured while she tries to steal the data. Obviously, the conversation between Carvanista and the Doctor can't be held since she isn't there, so it would be postponed to later. And talking about the Doctor not being there, the Grand Serpent Maydale is finding Kate and killing her himself, and obviously he doesn't care about the Doctor. Instead, he will encounter Belle while she tries to run after taking as much data as she could. She runs away from him only to meet the Doctor. Don't worry, I didn't forget that. I still didn't explain what happened to the Doctor. Be patient. As he comes to help Carvanista's escape. The Grand Serpent manages to see them escape, and as he recognizes the TARDIS, he decides to search for Artron energy, which is what leads him to Kate. Next, Winterquest. Last time we saw him, Winter was captured by past version of Swarm and Azure in a P-TARDIS, believing Belle might be there. However, now I find myself in a bit of a problem. If Dai isn't there, how could he escape? So I have two options for that. Originally I thought he might be there alone, given as the Ravagers already used all of their captives as energy, but it doesn't seem believable enough. Maybe he learned about it in the academy since he did know about TARDISes, so I guess he could spend a lot of time inside trying to escape. The other option I thought of was to add some sort of replacement for Dai, and that is why I created Cap. Remember them? After being captured inside the P-TARDIS, Winter meets Cap. When he asks them if Belle might be there, Cap explains that they are the only ones there. Since Cap heard Belle's warning before they were captured, they've been much warier inside the P-TARDIS. So when an opening to the outside were presented to them, Cap stayed behind while the rest of the captives left. Since the P-TARDIS were similar to a TARDIS, Cap could actually see what was going on. They saw how the people who left became hypnotized and then were led by the Ravagers to become energy. Due to their suspicion, Cap decided to hide inside the P-TARDIS. While they did, they managed to search for a way to disrupt the system, similar to what Dai did in the original series. In both cases, after exiting the P-TARDIS, the Vinder called the Doctor to rescue him/them. The P-TARDIS isn't capturing him/them again, and the Doctor soon comes. Don't worry, I didn't forget that I still didn't explain what happened to the Doctor. Be patient. After taking them back into their TARDIS, she decided to take the P-TARDIS as well. Let's say there's some sort of mechanism to minimize the P-TARDIS. In the cap option, before continuing with the adventure, I guess the Doctor could put them back in their home planet. Now you might be asking yourself, why did I decide to remove Di from the equation if it causes me to find these unconvincing solutions? Well, it's because her being there represents a big problem I have with the entire Flux series. A lot of times in the original show, I felt like the characters were led by the plot, instead of the plot being led by the character's action. And Di is a prime example for that. The Ravagers kidnapped her to have fun with her, or to torment Dan, or whatever, but then they thought she was insignificant, so they didn't even use her for energy like the rest of the captives. And the only result of them kidnapping her was that she could help Vinder escape. The plot needed a way for Vinder to escape, so the Ravagers kidnapped Di so she could escape. Another example for that was when the Doctor was split into 3 parts, and each part came to the exact location in the universe where she was needed to move the plot forward. I really hated that. So I decided to remove Di from there. And I felt like both Di and Claire were basically 2 halves of a character. One had a significant role in the plot, Claire being psychic, and the other had mostly emotionally weight, Di being Dan's friend, so combining the 2 made sense. Okay, rant's over, let's continue. Now, the interesting part. The Doctor versus Ruth. How will she survive? Simple. She tells Dude, whom she already sort of befriended, to zap Ruth using his ball thingy, and that put her unconscious. While Ruth is unconscious, the Doctor looks at the main division computer and learns about the antimatter thing. She asks the Ood what would happen if she removed the conversion plate, and he explained that it would return her back to the universe, though where isn't very clear. She plans to do so, but then stops as Ruth calls to her, revealing she's conscious again, and holding both the gun and the watch with the Doctor's memories. She suggests to the Doctor that she'll give her memories back, and the 2 of them could live to the other universe together, while the Flux destroys the first universe. The Doctor hesitates. She wants her memories back. She looks at the Ood, who represent the universe, and then back at Ruth, and the watch, which represents her memories. She then slowly walks toward Ruth, nods her head, and holds out her hand. Sorry, the Doctor says, and looks at the Ood. You don't need to apologize to an Ood, says Ruth, and gives her her watch. The Doctor takes the watch, and then looks at Ruth. I didn't. She then rips off the conversion plate. Ruth yells no, and reaches to grab the Doctor, but too late. The Doctor disappears. The Doctor finds herself back in the TARDIS. She realizes that the TARDIS served as some sort of anchor to catch her once she returned to the universe. She realizes that the TARDIS isn't moving, so she exits to find out where she is, only to meet Yaz and Co., including Kate. Since then, everything mostly goes the same. The one thing I'll add is that after sharing information, the Doctor wonders aloud that it feels like something is missing. And then Dan says, "We actually never went to fetch the dog. What's up with that?" After realizing that they need to get Carbonista, the plan goes into motion the same way it did in the original series, mostly. They travel back to the 70s to bring Di back, and she and Jericho infiltrate the Sontarans the same way, while the Doctor rescues Carbonista after meeting Bill earlier. The rest is pretty much the same, though Bill is the one who informed Vinder about the Grand Serpent being in league with the Sontarans. Also, when he's grieving his people, the Doctor doesn't really ask Carbonista about the relationship, but talks to him to try to comfort him. Though he says something like, there was a time I'd do anything for you, but you left me, and now I'm completely alone. And thus, the earlier conversation I postponed occur. The rest of their conflict with the Sontarans is the same. They use the P-TARDIS as a way to absorb the Flux and combine antimatter with matter, thus stopping it completely. Meanwhile, Vinder jams the Sontarans' comms, and Carbonista change the Lupari ship information just as they did in the original show. However, there's something missing. Something that the original show didn't address. They stopped the Flux, but how did they fix the damage the Flux already caused? And why did stopping the Flux made it so that time wasn't released? I don't think that the series gave answers to these questions, and I'm going to change that. After the Flux is stopped, the TARDIS receives a video call from Ruth. She's angry as the universe wasn't destroyed and she lost her friend. "This isn't your universe," says the Doctor. "This is my universe, and as long as I live, I won't let anyone harm it." Then her voice softens. "But you have another universe. You can go there and live whatever life you want there. You don't need the vision to tie you up. Go to your universe and live your life." "And what about you? You were my closing companion," Ruth almost cries. "I am not that person anymore. Don't let that person tie you up as well. Even if I do regain my memories, I don't think I'll be that person ever again." Ruth seemed distraught, but after a short while, she seemed to accept her fate. After she relaxed a bit, she tells the Doctor, "Go to Atropos. If you talk with time, you may convince it to fix the damages that the Flux already made. But why would time return to its prison? The planet Time isn't a prison, and Atropos isn't a cage. The planet is a palace, and the temple is a throne. Outside of its palace, time can go rampant, and it is not caged inside it. From there, it rules." Now, I know that this is not what the original show had in mind, but I A, didn't like what they did, and B, didn't understand what they did. So in my vision, the Ravagers didn't understand time at all. Being as they were temporal being and cared about destruction, they only saw time as a force of destruction, imprisoned by division. However, it was actually a strong force that needed a place to rule from. But out of it, it loses control. I hope it's acceptable and makes sense. Ruth gives the Doctor the coordinates to planet Time, says goodbye, and ends the call, as she headed to the other universe. The Doctor goes to the planet Time and has similar interaction with time as she did in the original ending of the series, though her asking it to fix the destruction is added. After the conversation, Time enters Atropos, standing at the center of the Maury circle, agrees to fix the major destruction caused by the Flux, and essentially seals itself again. The rest is completely the same as the original, with one exception. Dan apologizes to Dai for not coming. Whether she forgives him or not is not as clear, but I think an apology is still in order. And I guess that's about it. I first thought about making this video shortly after Series 13 ended, and most of the script was already done when Eve of the Daleks came out, which is why I didn't talk about it. Though I don't think there's anything I would have changed about it regarding the Timeless Child story arc. So what do you guys think? Did I do a good job? Was there anything I missed, or maybe something I changed without a good reason? I'd love to hear about it in the comments. There probably were a lot of things I could focus on, like giving Dan a more interesting arc or making sure he's more fleshed out character. But I decided to focus mainly on the Timeless Child arc, so I didn't really change much about it. As I mentioned, English isn't my native language and this is my first video I'm making in English. But I do have a YouTube playlist with videos that English speakers can watch right over here. The videos are either without dialogue or with English subtitles, and a few are in English. Give this playlist a go and maybe you'll find something to your liking. Anyway, that's enough rambling from me. This video is already pretty long, so I guess this is where I finish fixing. Thanks for watching and until next time.